The Young and the Restless Spoilers shock. The mahogany doors of the Jabbit boardroom were closed, but the silence inside was far from peaceful. It was a silence that hummed with the static of impending catastrophe. Diane Jenkins sat at the head of the polished table, her hands clasped so tightly over a manila folder that her knuckles had turned the color of bone. She wasn't waiting for the meeting to start. She was waiting for the perfect moment to detonate the bomb she had spent the last 48 hours assembling. Across the table, Billy Abbott was laughing at something Cal had said, his demeanor relaxed, almost arrogant. He looked like a man who believed he had won, a man who thought the nightmare of the past week, Jack's sudden, terrifying disappearance and miraculous return, was over. He adjusted his cuffs, leaning back in his leather chair with the ease of someone who felt entirely secure in his position at the helm of the family's legacy. Diane watched him, her eyes narrowing into slits of icy fury. "You have no idea," she thought, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You think you're the hero who brought my husband home, but I know what you paid for it." The memory of the discovery was still visceral, a jagged shard of glass in her mind. It had been late the previous night. Jack was asleep, exhausted from his ordeal, sedated by the doctors to ensure he rested. Diane had been unable to sleep, prowling the Abbott manse like a restless ghost. She had gone to Billy's study to leave a note regarding the upcoming board agenda, but the glow of his tablet, left carelessly on the sidebar, had caught her eye. It wasn't a locked screen. It was an email chain, a thread with a secure server she recognized from her own dark past, a direct, encrypted line to Newman Enterprises. The emails were unambiguous. They weren't just negotiations, they were a surrender. Billy hadn't just paid a ransom or utilized his contacts to free Jack. He had traded the future of the Abbott family for a quick fix. He had agreed to hand over the proprietary algorithm for Jabbett's new glue line, the very project that was supposed to secure the company's independence for the next decade, to Victor Newman. In exchange, Victor would arrange for Jack's release from the holding cell where his own operatives had likely placed him. It was a staged rescue, a play for power. Billy had effectively sold Jabbett's soul to the devil to look like the savior of its patriarch. "Shall we begin?" Ashley Abbott's voice cut through Diane's reverie. Ashley looked tired, her usual impeccable composure frayed by the stress of her brother's kidnapping. Tracy sat beside her, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes still red-rimmed. Jack was absent, still recovering, which made Billy's preening all the more intolerable. "I think we should," Billy said, sitting up straighter. "I have some ideas on how to spin Jack's return to the press. We need to show strength, stability." "Stability?" Diane repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She stood up slowly, the folder sliding across the table with a menacing hiss. "Is that what you call it, Billy? Stability?" Billy frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Diane, if you're going to start with the drama—" "This isn't drama," Diane interrupted, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a rage so profound it felt cold. "This is an autopsy." She opened the folder. Photos, printed emails, and a transcript of a voice memo she had recovered from the cloud server Billy foolishly synced with the house Wi-Fi spread out across the mahogany surface. The room went deadly quiet. Cal picked up a sheet of paper, his brow furrowing as he scanned the text. "What is this?" Cal asked, his voice dropping an octave. He looked up at his uncle, confusion warring with dawning horror. "Billy, this is a transfer agreement for the Glow algorithm to a shell company owned by Newman Media." "That's impossible," Tracy whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's not impossible," Diane said, her voice gaining strength, filling the room. "It's the price of admission, the price Billy paid to Victor Newman to let Jack go." Billy's face drained of color. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't know what you're talking about, Diane. I did what I had to do to get Jack back. Victor had him. We all knew it. I made a command decision." "You made a deal," Diane shouted, slamming her hand down on the table. "You didn't negotiate for Jack's life. You negotiated for your own glory. You handed Victor the keys to our kingdom so you could play the hero. You knew Victor took him. You knew it was a setup. And instead of fighting, instead of exposing Victor to the authorities or using the leverage we have, you capitulated. You gave him exactly what he wanted." She pointed a shaking finger at the transcript. "Read the date, Kyle. Read the timestamp." Kyle read it aloud, his voice shaking. 2 days before Dad was taken. The silence that followed was absolute. Ashley looked at Billy, her expression shifting from confusion to a look of utter betrayal. "You knew," she whispered. "You were talking to Victor about this before Jack was taken." "No," Billy stammered, looking around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. "It wasn't like that. Victor approached me. He threatened the company. I was trying to get ahead of it. The kidnapping. That was him escalating because I hesitated. I signed the deal to save Jack." "You signed the deal to save yourself from looking incompetent," Diane countered, her eyes blazing. "You used Jack as a bargaining chip. You let him sit in that cell for 3 days while you finalized the terms of your surrender. You let my husband, your brother, suffer so you could secure your position as the one who brought him home. All while selling us out from the inside." The doors to the boardroom opened, and the noise of the outer office flooded in. Diane had ensured the press was waiting in the lobby for a statement on Jack's health, but the door had been left slightly ajar by her design. The flashes of cameras from the corridor were visible, the murmurs of reporters sensing blood in the water. "You've compromised everything," Diane hissed, leaning over the table, her face inches from Billy's. "The merger with Winters, dead in the water if they find out we don't own our own tech anymore. The stock price, it will crater by morning. And Jack, when he finds out you traded his life's work to his worst enemy." "I saved his life," Billy roared, his composure shattering. "You think Victor wouldn't have killed him? You think you know how this game is played, Diane? You're an interloper. I am an Abbott." "You are a traitor," Ashley said, her voice icy calm. She stood up, aligning herself next to Diane, a visual shifting of alliances that struck Billy harder than any physical blow. "You compromised the family. You compromised the business. And you lied to us." "I did it for the family," Billy pleaded, looking at Tracy, usually his staunchest defender, but Tracy was looking down at her hands, tears streaming silently down her face. She couldn't even look at him. "The press is outside, Billy," Diane said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I suggest you leave through the back, because in about 5 minutes, I'm going to go out there and tell them exactly why the Abbott-Winters merger is on hold. I'm going to tell them that there is a rot at the center of this company, and we are cutting it out." Billy looked around the room. He saw no eyes. He saw only the wreckage of his own hubris reflecting back at him in the eyes of his family. He grabbed his jacket, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, and stormed toward the side exit. He paused at the door, looking back at Diane with sheer hatred. "Victor will destroy you for this," Billy spat. "He won't let you void that contract." "Let him try," Diane said, standing tall, looking every inch the matriarch she had fought to become. "I'm not the one who sold his soul." As the door clicked shut behind him, the energy in the room shifted from confrontation to devastation. Kyle sank into his chair, hat in his hands. "How do we fix this?" he moaned. "The Glow algorithm. It's the backbone of the fall launch, if Victor has it." "We fight," Ashley said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "We get the lawyers. We sue for coercion. We prove the contract was signed under duress." "It will take years," Tracy whispered. "And the scandal. Abbott versus Abbott. Again." Diane walked over to the window, looking out over the Genoa city skyline. She could see the imposing tower of Newman Enterprises in the distance, a monolith of black glass against the gray sky. She imagined Victor sitting in his office, steepling his fingers, that dark, triumphant smile playing on his lips. He had won in a way. He had sown chaos. He had turned brother against brother. He had the tech, but he didn't have Jack. And he didn't have her submission. Diane felt a strange sense of catharsis washing over her. For months, she had walked on eggshells, trying to prove she had changed, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect stepmother. But today, she had tapped into the old Diane, the fighter, the survivor. She had burned Billy to the ground to save the family, and she didn't regret it for a second. Yet, as the adrenaline faded, a cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She thought of Jack, lying in his bed at home, bruised and weary. He loved Billy, despite everything. When he woke up and learned that his brother had used him as currency, it wouldn't just anger him, it would break his heart. And the war that was coming, the legal battles, the media circus, the inevitable retaliation from Victor would demand a strength from Jack that he might not currently possess. The phone on the conference table buzzed. It was a notification from the Business News Wire. Abbott family turmoil. Sources cite internal betrayal as Billy Abbott exits Jabbit. The news was out. The war had begun. Diane turned back to the room, her face a mask of steely determination. "Call the legal team," she ordered Kyle, "and get security to change the codes. Billy doesn't step foot in this building again." "And Dad?" Kyle asked, his voice cracking. "Who tells Dad?" "I will," Diane said softly. "I'll tell him that his brother loves himself more than he loves us, and then I'll help him pick up the pieces." Across town, in the sterile, imposing silence of his executive suite, Victor Newman watched the live feed from the Jabbit lobby on his tablet. He saw the reporters swarming, the confusion, the panic. He took a sip of his espresso, the bitter liquid smooth on his tongue. "Well done, Billy boy," he murmured to the empty room, a dark chuckle rumbling in his chest. "You played your part perfectly." He swiped the screen off, his reflection staring back at him from the black glass. The chaos at Jabbit was delicious, a symphony of dysfunction he had orchestrated with a few emails and a well-timed abduction. But as his mind turned to Diane, his smile faded slightly. She had moved faster than he anticipated. She had cut the limb to save the tree. "You are a worthy opponent, Diane," he whispered, his eyes narrowing. "But the game is far from over." Back at the Abbott mansion, the silence was heavy. Different from the boardroom, it was the silence of a home that had been violated. Diane walked through the front door, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She ascended the stairs, her heart heavy. She pushed open the door to the master bedroom. Jack was sitting up in bed, looking out the window. He turned as she entered, his eyes searching hers. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the sadness in her gaze. "It's done?" he asked, his voice raspy. Diane nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his hand. "It's done. Billy is out." Jack closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracking through the stubble on his cheek. "He really did it. He really made the deal." "He did," Diane confirmed gently. "But we stopped him. We exposed it. We're going to fight Victor, Jack. We're going to get everything back." Jack squeezed her hand, his grip weak but desperate. "I don't care about the company, Diane. I care that my brother, he looked me in the eye when I got home. He hugged me. And he had that contract in his pocket the whole time." Diane leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. I know it hurts. But you have us. You have Kyle, and Tracy, and Ashley. We aren't going anywhere." As she held him, Diane stared at the wall, her mind already racing through the next steps. The legal injunctions, the PR spin, the inevitable confrontation with Victor. She knew this victory was Pyrrhic. They had cut out the cancer, but the patient was still bleeding. Billy was isolated, dangerous in his desperation. Victor was looming. And the Abbott family was fractured, perhaps irreparably. But as she felt Jack's breathing steady, Diane made a silent vow. She would be the wall that Victor Newman crashed against. She would be the shield that protected this family, even if she had to become the villain to do it. The war for the Abbott legacy had just entered a new, brutal phase, and Diane Jenkins was ready to lead the charge. The silence in the Abbott study was not peaceful. It was a suffocating blanket of dust and dread. Diane Jenkins stood by the mahogany desk, her fingers tracing the cold leather surface where Jack usually sat. The air still held the faint, spicy scent of his cologne, a cruel reminder of the man who had been snatched from this very life just 48 hours ago. She wasn't weeping. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, not when Victor Newman was pulling the strings and Billy Abbott was prowling the corridors of Chancellor Winters like a wolf who had finally tasted blood. Billy had delivered the news of the kidnapping with a performance of concern that hadn't quite reached his eyes. He had spoken of demands and ultimatums, but Diane had seen the flicker of calculation behind his gaze. He wasn't just a worried brother, he was an opportunist weighing the cost of a sibling against the value of a corporate empire. Diane opened the top drawer of the desk, the one Jack kept locked. She had the key, a small, silver thing he had pressed into her hand a week ago after a particularly tense dinner with Billy. "Just in case," he had whispered, his eyes dark with a premonition she hadn't understood then. Now, the metal felt hot against her palm. Inside, there was no chaotic jumble of papers. There was only a single, leather-bound notebook and a tablet with a sticky note attached. Protocol 19. Diane frowned, her heart hammering against her ribs. She flipped open the notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger of observations. Jack had been watching Billy. The entries were dated, detailing Billy's erratic behavior, his aggressive maneuvering against Lily, and his reckless gambits to reclaim Chancellor. But the final entry, dated the morning he vanished, made Diane's breath hitch. Billy is desperate. If Victor makes a move, Billy won't see it as a threat. He'll see it as a vacancy. He will use the chaos to lock the board down. He might even stall a rescue if it means securing the CEO chair. If I am gone, Diane, look at the tablet. It's the safety net. A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty mansion swept through her. Jack had predicted his own brother's betrayal. He hadn't just left clues, he had left an indictment. Diane powered on the tablet. It required a passcode. She typed in Harrison, and the screen unlocked, revealing a folder of encrypted audio files and emails. She tapped the first file. It was a recording of a conversation between Billy and his broker, discussing a leveraged buyout that would only work if the current leadership was incapacitated. "You knew," Diane whispered to the empty room, a fierce pride swelling in her chest alongside the anger. "You knew he would try to bury you." She didn't call the police. Not yet. Jack's instructions were clear: protect the legacy, then protect the man. If she went to the authorities now, Billy would spin it, claim he was acting in the company's best interest during a crisis. She needed to be smarter. She needed to be the Diane Jenkins who had survived death itself. Across town, the glass walls of the Chancellor Winter's CEO office reflected a man who believed he was untouchable. Billy Abbott stood looking out over the Genoa city skyline, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. The city looked different from this height, smaller, manageable. "Sir, the board is asking for an update on Jack." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, tentative and fearful. Billy pressed the button, his voice smooth, practiced. "Tell them negotiations are sensitive. We can't rush Victor. Any sudden moves could endanger Jack. We have to hold the line." He released the button and took a sip, a dark smile playing on his lips. Hold the line. It was a brilliant excuse. As long as Jack was a hostage, Billy was the acting head. If he delayed the exchange just for a few days, he could sign the merger documents that would make his position permanent. Victor wanted the company back, yes, but Victor also wanted to torture Jack. Billy was banking on the fact that Victor's vendetta would buy him time. He walked back to the desk, seeing the stack of contracts waiting for his signature. He was winning. He had finally outsmarted them all. The guilt was a distant buzz, easily ignored. Jack would be fine. Jack always survived. And when he came back, he'd find Chancellor Winters so thoroughly under Billy's control that he'd have no choice but to accept the new world order. He didn't know that across the city, the safety net was already being deployed. Diane sat in the sleek conference room of the Genoa City Athletic Club, the neutral ground she had chosen carefully. Across from her sat the head of the Chancellor Winters' Internal Security and Compliance Division, a man named Sterling who had been loyal to Catherine Chancellor above all else. "I'm not asking you to believe me," Diane said, sliding the tablet across the polished table. "I'm asking you to listen to Jack." Sterling looked at her skeptically. "Mrs. Abbott, Billy is the acting CEO. If this is some personal vendetta, play the file labeled The Stall." Diane cut in, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Sterling tapped the screen. Billy's voice filled the room, clear and damning. It was a recording from a week prior, a monologue recorded on Jack's dictaphone which had evidently been left running during a confrontation. "I don't care if it burns, Jack. If I have to burn it down to rule the ashes, I will. You think you can protect the company from me? One day you won't be here to stop me. And when that happens, I won't hesitate." Sterling's face paled. This is intent to sabotage." "There's more," Diane said, leaning forward. Jack set up a digital trail. He knew Billy was rerouting funds to a shell corporation to buy voting shares. It's all there. Billy isn't negotiating for Jack's release. "Mr. Sterling, he's blocking it. He's refusing Victor's calls to buy time to finalize the share purchase." She saw the realization dawn in Sterling's eyes. It wasn't just corporate malfeasance. It was a brother knowingly leaving another to rot for profit. "What do you want me to do?" Sterling asked, his demeanor shifting from skeptical to horrified. "We don't just fire him," Diane said, her eyes cold. We destroy his credibility so thoroughly that he can never touch this company again. We let him think he's won. And then, at the board meeting this afternoon, we play this. The boardroom was packed. The tension was palpable, a physical weight pressing down on the shoulders of the shareholders. Billy stood at the head of the table, projecting an image of somber strength. "I know you are all worried about my brother," Billy began, his voice dropping to a register of deep concern. "I have been in constant communication with the kidnappers. Their demands are unreasonable. They want to dismantle Chancellor Winters. I cannot, in good conscience, allow my father's legacy to be destroyed, even for Jack. Jack wouldn't want that." He paused for effect, waiting for the murmurs of agreement. "Therefore, I am proposing a motion to lock the current executive structure in place for the next fiscal year, to ensure stability." Stability. The voice came from the back of the room. Diane stepped out of the shadows, dressed in a sharp white suit that made her look like an avenging angel. Billy's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before recovering. "Diane, I know you're upset, but this is a business meeting." "It's an investigation," Diane corrected, walking slowly toward him. Jack anticipated this. "Billy, he knew you would use his absence. He knew you would try to sell the narrative that he was a martyr for the company." "You're hysterical," Billy scoffed, looking around the table for support. "Jack is missing. I am trying to save this ship." "Jack isn't just missing," Diane said, reaching the head of the table. She plugged a USB drive into the main console. The massive screen behind Billy flickered to life. He left a message. For this exact moment. On the screen, a video file opened. It was Jack, recorded in his study. He looked tired but sharp. "If you are watching this," the video Jack said, his voice booming through the surround sound, "it means I have been removed from the equation. And Billy has moved to consolidate power. He will tell you he is protecting the legacy. He is lying." Billy turned to the screen, his face draining of color. This is a fabrication, deepfake. "I have authorized the release of my private server logs," Jack continued on screen. "They show that Billy has been soliciting offers to sell off the media division to fund a personal takeover. He doesn't want to save the company. He wants to own it. And he will let me die to do it." The room erupted. Shareholders were shouting. Phones were being pulled out. Billy looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. "This is insane," Billy shouted over the noise, slamming his hand on the table. "Jack is paranoid. He's been jealous of me for months. Diane is manipulating this." "Are these paranoid?" Diane asked, holding up a stack of printed emails, the hard evidence from the tablet. She tossed them onto the table. They slid across the polished wood, scattering in front of the board members. "Emails from your private account, Billy, sent to Victor Newman's competitors 3 days ago. You were trying to cut a side deal. You were going to hand over the company anyway. But only if you were guaranteed the CEO spot. You weren't protecting Jack from Victor. You were trying to outbid Victor for the crown." Billy reached for the papers, his hands shaking. He read the top sheet, and the air left his lungs. It was undeniable. It was his own correspondence, routed through the very server Jack had been monitoring. Billy stammered, looking at the faces around the table. He saw disgust. He saw shock. He saw the end. "You blocked the negotiation," Diane said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You ignored the ransom call this morning. I saw the logs, Billy. You let it go to voicemail while you were drafting that motion for stability." "I was going to call them back," Billy roared, his composure shattering. "I needed leverage." "You needed a dead brother," Diane said brutally. The silence that followed was absolute. Billy looked at Diane, and for the first time, he saw the trap. He had been so focused on the chessboard that he hadn't noticed the floor beneath him was rigged. "Security," Sterling's voice cut through the room. Two uniformed guards stepped forward. "Mr. Abbott, I think it's best if you step away from the table." "You can't do this," Billy hissed, backing away. "I am the CEO." "Not anymore," Diane said. "The bylaws are clear. Gross misconduct and fiduciary breach trigger an immediate suspension. Jack wrote that clause, too." Billy looked at the screen, where the frozen image of Jack seemed to be looking down at him with disappointed judgment. He looked at Diane, who stood tall, her eyes dry and hard. "You think this brings him back?" Billy spat, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. "No," Diane said, turning her back on him to address the board. But it clears the way for us to save him, now that the obstruction is gone. She didn't watch as security escorted Billy out. She heard the heavy doors close, the sound echoing like a gavel strike. The room was chaotic, people shouting questions, demanding answers. Diane stood firm in the center of the storm. She had decoded the message. She had deployed the safety net. She had cut the rot out of the company. Now, she had to go find her husband. And God help Victor Newman when she did.